My name is Evelyn Henderson. I'm 66 years old, a retired Marine Corps engineer. I served 18 years before an injury to my lower back forced me to hang up the uniform. I earned 3 medals for service, but none of that mattered the moment I stepped into that courtroom. Not today. The courtroom was packed family press, former clients of our construction firm, and a few unfamiliar faces who clearly came for the drama. I could feel their eyes crawling over my worn coat and service boots. I didn't wear them to look noble. They're the only pair that doesn't hurt my feet. Kyle, my only son, sat with his wife Amanda and a lawyer who looked barely 30. Kyle wore a tailored navy suit, slick hair, and that same smug smile he's had since he started making money he didn't earn. I stood alone, no legal team, no notepad. Just a red file folder taped on the corners, worn at the edges. That folder and my silence unnerved him more than if I'd brought in 10 lawyers. The judge asked me if I had anything to present. But before I could speak, Amanda's lawyer stood. "Your Honor," he said confidently, "we'd like to submit that the defendant, Miss Evelyn Henderson, does not own any portion of the disputed property. She is a retired veteran with no current income, a history of post-traumatic stress disorder, and according to our records, no stake in the company ED Contracting." His words were designed to reduce me, turn me into a figure of pity, a burden. He succeeded in shifting the room's temperature. Kyle didn't even look at me, but he did nod to the cameras in the back. Amanda whispered something in his ear and chuckled. I could almost hear it. "She's just a veteran with no money." That was the moment. That exact sentence from my son made something click inside me. I looked up, not at him, not at Amanda, not even at the judge, but straight ahead. I took a slow step toward the bench and placed the red folder gently on the edge. I spoke clearly so that the court reporter would catch every syllable. "I'm not here to argue. I'm not here to defend a name. I only ask that the court review the contents of this folder specifically. The signed documents, the trust assignments, and the business transfer clauses left by my late husband, Douglas Henderson." The judge furrowed his brows. He opened the folder. His eyes darted left to right. Then again. Then again. He lifted a single sheet and asked the court clerk to bring over the projector. As the first page hit the screen, the courtroom went quiet. A company trust document, signed, notarized, 5 years ago, then a second page. A list of 14 loan transfers, each from ED Contracting to an account under Kyle's name, each marked unpaid, each time stamped. Then the judge flipped one more page and paused. From behind me, the courtroom doors creaked open. Boots echoed. 1, 2, 3. 12 men in partial dress uniform walked silently to the front row. None of them saluted. They didn't need to. They carried something else. One of them, Lieutenant Colonel Reyes, placed a brown envelope on the judge's bench. "Sir," he said, "this file was left in our safekeeping by the late Douglas Henderson. It contains the final clause of the trust to be delivered only if the trust beneficiary, Mrs. Evelyn Henderson, was ever brought to court in an attempt to strip her of legal assets." The judge blinked and stood up. He read aloud the final line of the clause. "In the event my wife is dragged to court by blood who forget blood, this clause confirms she owns the company, and the debt is yours." Gasps rippled across the room. One of the women in the back dropped her phone. The clicking of keyboards from journalists halted as every eye turned to the judge, who still hadn't sat back down. Kyle's lawyer stammered, "Your Honor, this is highly irregular." But the judge raised a hand. "No one moves," he said sharply. "No one speaks unless spoken to." Amanda's face went white. Kyle looked like he'd swallowed glass. He turned to his lawyer, who now leaned away from him like he'd just caught fire. I said nothing. I didn't smile. I didn't blink. For 26 years, I co-managed our household while Doug ran the business. He made the money. I raised the child. I never asked for control. I trusted my husband. And clearly, he'd never stop protecting me even after death. The judge tapped the folder again. "This trust is valid, signed and shielded under business succession law. Mrs. Henderson is not only the owner of ED Contracting. She has been the rightful owner for 5 years. Furthermore, the debt accumulated by Mr. Kyle Henderson is now considered outstanding liability, both civil and potentially criminal." At that moment, there was a knock at the side door. 2 FBI agents entered. Quiet, professional. They carried nothing but a badge and a document folder. Your Honor, one said, we apologize for the interruption. We've received confirmation from the Office of Federal Fraud Investigations. We're here to serve a warrant for the arrest of Amanda Wells. The courtroom went still again. Amanda's voice trembled. What? The second agent read from the file. Amanda Wells, you are under arrest for wire fraud, identity misrepresentation on federal loan applications, and laundering funds through a series of offshore accounts using the name of Evelyn Henderson as a false beneficiary. Everyone turned to me, but I simply said I never received a dime. Amanda shook her head, took a step back. Kyle tried to reach her arm. She pulled away. I did it for us, she whispered. The agent stepped forward. One placed cuffs gently but firmly on her wrists. She turned to Kyle. I told you we had to get the house, Kyle. I told you. I was drowning. Kyle didn't speak. The judge exhaled slowly. This hearing is adjourned. The matter is closed. All property, business assets, and real estate are to remain under Evelyn Henderson's control as per the trust directive. I collected the folder from the bench, nodded politely, and walked out of the courtroom. 12 Marines followed. As I stepped into the hallway, one of them said quietly, Doug would have been proud, maybe. But in that moment, I wasn't thinking about Doug. I wasn't even thinking about Kyle or Amanda. I was thinking about the first night I slept in a VA barracks after deployment. How cold it was, how empty, and how somehow this courtroom, this battlefield felt even colder. Back then I'd thought my enemy wore a different uniform. Today I learned something else. Sometimes the war finds you at home. And sometimes your best defense is the man who loved you enough to keep a file, even after death. They say the hardest part of getting older isn't the pain in your joints, or the friends you bury, or even the way your reflection begins to shift into someone you don't quite recognize anymore. No, the hardest part is how quiet life becomes, and how easy it is to mistake that quiet for safety. After I retired from the Marine Corps, Doug and I bought a small cedar house on the outskirts of Bend, Oregon. It wasn't fancy, but it was solid like him. A 1-story with 2 bedrooms, a wide front porch, and a backyard that backed up against the edge of Deschutes National Forest. The kind of place you imagine dying in peacefully, after a life of doing things the right way. Doug was already running ED contracting when I moved in full-time. He'd started the company after serving his own 20 years in the military. Civil engineering turned commercial builds, then private homes. Never big enough to attract media attention, but just enough to keep the crew working year-round and our books clean. Doug handled the numbers like they were sacred. He trusted banks less than he trusted his own 2 hands. He balanced every column by pencil before transferring it to digital. He was quiet, my opposite in every way. Where I barked, he paused. Where I doubted, he planned. He never raised his voice to me, not once. Even when I came back from deployment and forgot where I was in the middle of the night. Even when I lost my temper over a squeaking floorboard or a car door slamming. Doug never flinched. He just stood still until I came back to myself. Then he'd hand me tea and sit close without speaking. We raised Richard in that house, our only child. I tried not to bring my military into the parenting, but it showed up anyway. Structure, chores, clear boundaries. Doug balanced me with softness. Saturday pancakes, nighttime stories, patient eyes when Richard lied about eating his broccoli. We were good parents, not perfect, but we showed up even when the world didn't. Richard was a good kid, ambitious, stubborn. He got a scholarship to Oregon State for economics, then surprised us all by marrying Amanda just after his junior year. She was beautiful inside and out, thoughtful, smart. She used to bring me books she thought I'd like and help Doug with bookkeeping during tax season. At the time, I thought, we're lucky. She's a good one. The change started after Amanda's 3rd business failed. She'd tried a boutique candle company, a digital marketing startup, and then a luxury dog treat brand. Doug helped them bankroll each attempt quietly, never telling me how much. I only found out later, buried in a ledger line. After the 3rd one went under, Amanda got quieter, more careful. She stopped coming around as often. When they did visit, she kept her eyes on her phone, rarely made eye contact, and started correcting Richard mid-sentence. They began speaking in a strange kind of code, using terms like leveraging equity and preparing for long-term scale. I didn't ask questions. Maybe I should have. Doug did, but gently. One night after they'd left, he poured us both a whiskey and said, "They're not in trouble yet, but they're heading somewhere that looks a lot like it." I asked if he'd loan them anything again. He didn't answer right away, just looked into his glass like it might rewrite the numbers for him. Then he said, "Some things we do because we love. But love doesn't mean blindness, Evie. I'll start protecting the foundation now." I didn't understand what he meant, not until much later. Those days were quiet, not because everything was okay, but because we didn't yet know it wasn't. Doug still cooked Sunday roasts. I still walked the fence line every morning with my coffee and boots. And Richard still called me Mom with a voice that didn't shake. But silence is a clever thing. It doesn't warn you. It just waits until the noise hits so hard, you can't remember what peace felt like. That peace ended on a Tuesday morning 5 months after Doug died. A knock on the door, Amanda's lawyer, a packet of legal documents, a smile that didn't reach his eyes, and a line that still haunts me. "This is just a formality, Ms. Henderson. Your son and daughter-in-law are ready to help you transition out of the house." They called it a transition. I called it the start of war. Doug died on a Monday. No warning, no slow decline. Just a moment, one sharp breath as he reached for the coffee mug I'd set down by the window, and then nothing. I was still talking about the birds when he collapsed. A juvenile hawk had landed on the fence that morning, and I remember saying, "They're getting bold this year." He didn't respond. He never would again. The stroke took him fast. Paramedics said it was massive, unsurvivable. And still I sat in that ambulance holding his hand, whispering, "Stay with me," as if my voice could rewind time. The funeral was small, just the way he would have wanted. A flag over the casket. Taps played by a teenager too nervous to breathe right. Tears soaked into the front of my blouse, but none of them were Richard's. My son stood stiff by Amanda's side, sunglasses on, jaw locked. He didn't cry, not when they folded the flag. Not when I handed him the medal Doug had worn for 20 years. Amanda took it from him and slipped it into her purse without looking at me. After the service, people brought casseroles, hugged me too long, and left quickly. Grief makes folks uncomfortable, so they vanish. But Amanda stayed. Not for me, never for me, but to go through Doug's files. "I just thought we could help you get ahead of the paperwork," she said, her voice sweet and firm, like a kindergarten teacher. She walked straight into Doug's study and began flipping through binders before I could answer. Richard followed her, quiet as always. They weren't looking for memories. They were looking for signatures. I stood in the doorway and watched her lift documents like she owned them. Tax returns, land deeds, even the operating agreements for ED contracting. At some point, Amanda glanced up and said, "You should consider transferring the house title now. It'll save trouble later." Her voice didn't carry malice. That's what made it worse. I asked her why she was in such a hurry. She smiled. Doug would have wanted things clean. Doug wouldn't have wanted anything Amanda was planning. But I didn't argue. Not then. Grief has a way of muting you. Not just your voice, but your instincts too. You move like you're underwater, seeing shadows of danger, but unable to swim toward or away from it. The next few weeks were unbearable. The house was too quiet. Every creak of the floorboard felt like Doug walking in. I'd reach for his toothbrush every morning by mistake. His shoes sat by the door, untouched. His office smelled like cedar and coffee. I left the window cracked so it wouldn't lose him too quickly. I'd been a Marine. I'd slept in deserts and storms. But I'd never known loneliness like this. Because Doug didn't just love me, he buffered me from the world. He handled the taxes, the business filings, the legal language that twisted truth into law. He protected me in every way I didn't know I needed. And now he was gone. The silence after his death wasn't just quiet. It was surgical, precise. Every day a new cut. A missing login. A file Amanda had moved for safekeeping. A call from a bank I didn't recognize asking for verification I couldn't provide. When I asked Richard about it, he said, "We're just trying to stabilize things, Mom. You don't need this stress." But stress was already here, sitting at my kitchen table, flipping through trust documents I hadn't signed and offering me herbal tea like that made it polite. Grief had taken Doug. And now it seemed grief was going to take everything else too. It was a Wednesday morning, cloudy, sharp-edged, the kind that made the house feel too big and too empty. Amanda arrived unannounced like she'd done every other day that week, a tote bag slung over one shoulder and a folder tucked beneath her arm. She brought croissants I didn't ask for and a smile I didn't believe. "Morning, Evelyn," she said lightly, placing the bag on the counter like she owned the kitchen. "I thought we could finally go over a few things. It's all very straightforward." She tapped the folder twice before sliding it across the table toward me. "Don't worry," she added, "we've simplified the paperwork. Just signatures. I didn't open it." Richard came in a few minutes later, his eyes flicking between the folder and my hands. He looked tired, but it was the kind of tired you earn from decisions, not labor. "Mom," he said gently, sitting down beside me. "We've just been thinking about what's practical." Practical. That word again. Amanda poured herself coffee and stayed standing. She always did that, stood when she wanted control of the room. "We don't want you dealing with maintenance or bills," she said. "The roof needs repairs. The property tax is due again in November. This is a way to make your life easier." I opened the folder. It was a property transfer agreement, neatly formatted, no smudges, even highlighted sections where my signature was needed. There were lines about survivorship rights, equity distribution, and future sale potential. Their names were already typed in as co-owners. Mine was listed as transferor. My heart thudded, not from shock, but from a cold, slow recognition. Amanda had gone to law school for a year and dropped out. But she remembered just enough to be dangerous. "You've already filled in everything I said," keeping my tone neutral. "It's just a draft," Amanda said quickly. "We can change anything you want." Except I knew she didn't mean that. Richard leaned forward, elbows on the table, like a child asking for forgiveness. "Mom, I know this seems fast, but we're just trying to protect the property. Market's changing. We could refinance or even rent it out short term. It'd give you more liquidity." Liquidity. That was a word Doug used when he wanted to sound patient while explaining something I didn't understand. "I'm still living here," I said quietly. "Exactly," Amanda jumped in. "So nothing really changes. You just won't be burdened with the legal side of things." Burdened. Like I was becoming too much. I looked at the paper again. The font was modern, the formatting clean, but something about the language felt hollow. It was written in a voice I didn't recognize. It didn't sound like protection. It sounded like preparation for something else. "I'd like some time," I said. Amanda and Richard exchanged a glance. Richard nodded, but I could see the disappointment flicker behind his eyes. "Of course," he said. "Take a day or two. Just think about the future, Mom. I'm only trying to do the right thing." He kissed my forehead before leaving the room. It felt staged. Amanda didn't say goodbye. She just picked up her empty coffee mug and placed it in the sink, my sink, and left without closing the door behind her. I sat at the kitchen table for a long time, the folder still in front of me. Outside, the trees swayed without wind. Something inside me had shifted subtly but irreversibly. I couldn't name it yet, but it felt like when you wake up knowing a dream wasn't just a dream. Like a warning. Doug used to say I had good instincts in the field. You feel things early, he'd tell me, long before they show up on the radar. Now, sitting in our kitchen, I felt something coming. It wasn't in the papers. It was in their faces. In Amanda's controlled tone. In Richard's urgent kindness. In the way they needed this done now. I didn't know what I'd do next. But I knew one thing for certain: I wouldn't sign anything. Not yet. It happened faster than I thought it would. 2 days after they dropped off the folder, Amanda returned, not with groceries or tea or the usual pretense of kindness, but with a clipboard, a stranger in a blazer, and a long measuring tape. "This is Mr. Halverson," she announced, as she walked in, not bothering to knock. "He's a licensed appraiser. Just routine paperwork for insurance updates." The man gave me a polite nod but didn't wait for me to respond. He began pacing through the hallway, noting square footage, ceiling height, and asking pointed questions about the furnace and plumbing. I stood frozen at the base of the stairs. Amanda had made no eye contact. Richard wasn't with her, but she wore lipstick and heels, 2 things she never wore to see me. I followed the man with my eyes as he moved into Doug's study, the one room Amanda never dared to enter before. He didn't ask permission, and neither did she. By evening, Amanda was still there, this time with her laptop out on the dining table, plugged in like she belonged there. When I asked where Richard was, she didn't answer. She just said, "Things will move smoother if we all cooperate." That night, I didn't sleep. I walked through every room, each memory feeling more fragile than the last. I sat in Doug's chair, held the armrest like his hand might still be there. Then I packed. Not because I had to yet, but because my instincts were screaming louder than my pride. I took a canvas tote, filled it with a change of clothes, Doug's retirement photo, the black and white picture of us on the airfield in '84, and the shoebox that held all the letters he'd written me from deployment. I left everything else. The furniture, the books, the certificates on the wall, none of them felt like mine anymore. At 2:45 a.m., I stepped out the front door. The night air was cold and smelled faintly of pine and smoke. I didn't look back. I walked 3 blocks before calling Sandra. She answered on the first ring. "Eve." "Yeah." "You need a place?" "Yes, I'll put the porch light on." Sandra lived in a 1-bedroom bungalow 10 minutes from my house, or what used to be my house. We served together for 8 years, and she'd always had that dry, reliable strength you wish you could bottle. When I arrived, she didn't ask what happened. She opened the door, handed me a blanket, and said, "Sofa's yours. Bathroom's to the left." The silence was comforting. We didn't speak much that night. But the next morning, over instant coffee and cinnamon toast, she finally said, "You're going to need more than a couch and sympathy, Eve." "I know," I whispered. "You still remember what Doug told you about Landon?" I paused. She saw the recognition bloom in my face. "If anything ever happens to me," Doug had said months before his stroke, "go to Landon. He'll know what to do. And whatever you do, don't sign anything until then." Sandra leaned back and crossed her arms. "I don't know where Landon is now," I admitted. Sandra didn't hesitate. "I do." I blinked. "He's in Wyoming. Retired from the Marines last year. Quiet life now, but still sharp as a tack. He'll see through the smoke before you even light the fire." I swallowed hard. Something in me stirred, something I hadn't felt in a long time. Not anger. Not grief. Something older than Amanda's ambition or Richard's betrayal. Older than any shame I'd carried. Resolve. I looked down at the tote bag by my feet. Then I looked up at Sandra and said, "Let's find him." I arrived at the law office just as the rain began. It wasn't heavy, just enough to make everything look gray. The brass plaque on the door read, "Landon and Associates." My hand hesitated for a moment before turning the knob. Inside, it smelled like old books and lemon polish. "Evelyn," a deep voice called. It was him, Walter Landon, my husband's old colleague, friend, and trusted advisor. He hadn't changed much, balding at the top, wire-rimmed glasses, and that heavy way he walked, as if every step carried the weight of too many secrets. "I was wondering when you'd come," he said quietly, motioning for me to follow him inside. We sat in his office. Shelves lined with legal texts towered around us. He opened a drawer and pulled out a red folder sealed and labeled with Douglas's handwriting. My breath caught in my chest. "I've been holding on to this since before Douglas passed," he said. "He gave it to me under strict instructions." I stared at the folder. Did he know this would happen? Landon nodded slowly. Not exactly. But he suspected that if anything were to happen to him, certain individuals might try to manipulate you or the estate. I didn't have to ask who he meant. He pushed the folder toward me. My fingers trembled slightly as I broke the seal. The first page was a letter. Handwritten. "My Evelyn," it began. His handwriting was unmistakable, slanted, neat, a little old-fashioned. "If you're reading this, it means I couldn't protect you the way I wanted. But I did everything I could to prepare. The house the company shares, the trust fund, everything has been accounted for. You are not alone, even if it feels like it. Let the folder guide you. Trust Landon, and remember, I believe in you." I bit my lip, pressing the letter to my chest for a second. Then I turned to the documents. Landon leaned in. "You are the sole beneficiary of Douglas's personal trust. That includes the house in Oregon, the forest plot, and most importantly, 49% of ED contracting." I looked up sharply. I thought he sold his shares when he retired. "He made it appear that way," Landon explained. "But he retained voting rights through a silent agreement. That agreement is now yours." "What about the rest of the company?" I asked. Landon opened another folder. Douglas suspected Richard might try to get involved, so he arranged for the other 51% to remain split between 2 silent partners, former Marines he trusted deeply. "They're loyal, and they're ready to act if you are." It was so much to process. I hadn't expected this. I came hoping for shelter, maybe legal advice. But Douglas? He'd built a fortress for me, quietly. "Why didn't he tell me?" I whispered. "He wanted to," Landon said gently. But he feared you'd object, say he was being paranoid. So he wrote everything down. It's all here. I spent the next hour reading. Every page revealed another layer of how carefully Douglas had prepared. He had created a power of attorney that bypassed probate if contested. He had filed a quitclaim deed securing the house under the trust's name. He had even left instructions with Landon for what to do if Amanda or Richard filed any paperwork behind my back. By the end, I wasn't just overwhelmed. I was angry. Not the kind of angry that lashes out, but the kind that sits in your chest like fire demanding justice. Can we fight this? I asked. Landon gave a small smile. We can do better. We can win. I nodded. Then let's begin. Landon slid another folder across the table, this one bulkier and secured with a heavy black clip. I opened it, half expecting more estate documents, but what I found made my stomach turn. ED Contracting has not been sold, and it most certainly is not bankrupt, he said, leaning back in his chair. Your son lied to you. The folder contained updated financials, tax filings, employee rosters, and internal memos, all dated within the last 6 months. Each one bore the company's official seal and signature from a man named Tom Chandler. I furrowed my brow. I don't know this name, Landon nodded. Tom Chandler. He was Douglas's oldest friend from the Corps. He's been managing the day-to-day operations since Douglas stepped down, quietly. On paper, the company transitioned to Tom as a figurehead, but legally, the controlling interest, 49%, belongs to you. I flipped through the documents. Tom's signature was on every page, but next to it in finer print were power of execution clauses that referenced Douglas's trust, and ultimately, me. Every major company decision required consent from the beneficiary of the trust, me. I leaned back, stunned. Richard said Dad sold the company years ago, that the debts were overwhelming. He said they had to liquidate just to cover Amanda's situation. Landon's lips tightened. That's not true. Douglas anticipated Richard might fabricate something like that, so he preserved every financial trail. The company never filed for bankruptcy. In fact, it's been doing modestly well. Profits are smaller but steady. And Tom kept the lights on out of loyalty. I stared down at the balance sheets. Tom had even written small notes in the margins. Updates about supply chain issues, staff turnover, even holiday bonuses. He'd run the company like someone who knew it mattered. I need to talk to him, I said. Can you set that up? Already did, Landon said. He's waiting for you tomorrow, and there's more. He handed me another sheet, one with Douglas's handwriting. Grace Evelyn, it read at the top. If you're reading this, it means you know. Tom knows. Landon knows. And soon the court will know. I've arranged things so you have the tools, but what you do with them is up to you. You taught Richard to walk, but I hope he remembers who taught him to stand. I read that last line twice. Douglas hadn't just prepared for his death. He'd laid a map for how to survive it. That night I stayed at Sandra's again, folder in my lap. She brought me a glass of hot milk and didn't ask questions. You always knew he had your back, she said simply. I nodded. I just didn't realize how much. In the morning, I arrived at ED Contracting's temporary office. It wasn't the old downtown building. This was a modest warehouse tucked behind a loading dock off the main road. A big American flag flapped above the front door. Tom Chandler met me at the gate. Crew-cut, weathered hands, eyes that had seen more than they said. Ma'am, he said, standing tall. Then, after a beat, I was waiting for this day. He gave me a firm handshake, then opened the office door. Inside, everything was neat, efficient, like a barracks desk. He walked me through the operations, showed me the crew logs, payroll, supplier lists. The company was modest but intact. Loyal workers, clean books. Why didn't you tell me before? I asked finally. Tom looked me straight in the eyes. Douglas made me promise, said you'd come when you were ready, not a day sooner. And now I was here. I looked around at the hard-earned survival, the quiet success, the resilience. We're going to fight this, I said. Tom smiled. We already are. As I walked out, I held the folder tighter. Richard thought he'd buried my legacy under lies. But Douglas had built something stronger than inheritance. He'd built me a way back, and I intended to use it. Back at Landon's office, the folder that had just shifted the ground beneath me wasn't even the last of it. He opened another drawer and pulled out a narrow binder. Burgundy cover, thin gold trim. more unassuming than the previous ones. But the contents inside, they screamed. These, Landon said, are wire transfers, 14 of them. I sat up straighter, from ED Contracting's operating account straight into a personal account under Richard's name. He didn't have to say more. I opened the binder and flipped through the pages. 14 transfers, spread over 2 years. None authorized through any board, none tied to a formal loan document, and none disclosed on the internal financial reports I had just reviewed with Tom. Amounts ranging from $6,000 to as high as $22,000. Always rounded. Always processed on Friday afternoons. Like he thought the quiet before the weekend would hide the theft. Landon tapped one of the transactions. This one's for Amanda's failed boutique venture. That happened right after her second store closed. Remember, I did. Amanda had cried to me on the phone saying she felt like a failure, like she had embarrassed the family. I told her setbacks were part of growth. I didn't know she and Richard were using Douglas's company as their private piggy bank to patch the wounds. Another transfer a few months later lined up with the down payment on their new SUV. And another just days before they invited a dozen friends to a rental house in Sedona for Amanda's birthday. My stomach clenched. They hadn't just taken from the company, they'd taken from people, from workers who relied on steady cash flow for their paychecks. From Tom, who kept the lights on with loyalty alone. These aren't just bad choices, I said. These are crimes. Landon nodded. You're not wrong. Technically, they may try to call it a shareholder advance, except Richard doesn't own a single legitimate share. And more importantly, these were unauthorized disbursements, without board approval, made under fraudulent pretenses. I looked at him. So why hasn't anyone said anything? Because Richard made himself look like a man cleaning up his father's mess. Everyone thought he was trying to stabilize the company, not gut it. And Tom? Well, Tom was kept in the dark. Most of these transfers were done through a secondary access code only Douglas and the internal bookkeeper had. I closed the binder and exhaled. They didn't want the house, I whispered. They needed to bury the paper trail. Landon raised an eyebrow. Now you're seeing it. It all aligned now. The sudden push to take ownership of the house. The urgency behind the transfer paperwork Amanda brought to my kitchen table. The desperate politeness masking tension. They weren't after my memories or the roof over my head. They were trying to survive exposure. They're drowning, I said. Yes, Landon agreed. And they were hoping your silence would be the lifeline. I paused, then asked the question that had been burning since the second transfer I saw. Who processed these? Who signed off? He reached into the binder again and slid out a printed screenshot. At the bottom, a name appeared. Not Richard's, not Amanda's. Brenda McAllister, the company's in-house bookkeeper. I hadn't seen her in years, but I remembered her clearly, always precise, always on time, always by the books. She had worked with Douglas for nearly 2 decades. She's the one, Landon said. The only person who can confirm Richard pressured her or misled her into processing these transfers. My mind reeled. Brenda, of all people. She still works there, Landon nodded. Tom kept her on payroll part-time. Said he couldn't find someone more loyal. I looked down at the list again. 14 times. 14 chances to say no. 14 cracks in the wall before it crumbled. Would she talk? Landon didn't answer right away. He leaned back and studied me. She might. But she won't do it out of fear or anger. She'll only talk if she believes she's protecting something bigger. I nodded slowly. She might talk, he repeated, if you ask. He handed me her contact info scribbled on a yellow sticky note. My hand trembled slightly as I folded it and placed it into my coat pocket. The day was winding down. Outside Landon's window, the city faded into gold and lavender, the early blush of evening. Before I stood to leave, Landon said one last thing. If we go forward with this, if you confront Richard legally, it won't be pretty. I know. And if you don't, I looked at him. My voice didn't shake. Then I'd be leaving Douglas's company in the hands of the people who betrayed him. Landon nodded, not with approval, but respect. I stepped out of the office, the binder pressed tight to my chest. 14 transfers, 14 truths, and just maybe one witness. The courtroom was packed, standing room only. The temperature wasn't hot, but I could feel sweat gather along my back. Not from nerves, not from fear, but from the kind of quiet, calculated fury that only a mother can know. I sat at the petitioner's table with the red folder in my lap. Landon to my left. Across the room, Richard leaned back in his chair, one arm draped lazily behind Amanda. His suit was crisp, his expression cocky. Amanda wore a pale blue blouse and a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. The judge entered. Everyone rose. When we sat, Richard was the first to speak. "Your Honor," he said, rising with theatrical polish, "this case is nothing more than a bitter attempt by a former soldier to cling to relevance. My mother, Evelyn Grace, is a retired Marine. Yes, but her condition both financially and emotionally has deteriorated. She's essentially homeless, living off borrowed goodwill." He glanced at me like I was a puddle on the floor. "She has no ownership records, no clear title to the property in dispute, no legal ties to the business she claims to own. In truth, she's just a veteran with no money." Amanda rose, next tone sugar-coated poison. "We've cared for her for years, let her stay in the home, helped her cope with the loss of my father-in-law. But after his passing, things changed. She grew paranoid, hostile, clingy. She started making wild claims about trust funds and company shares, claims that have no basis in fact. I stayed silent. I didn't flinch. I kept my eyes forward." The judge turned to me. "Ms. Evelyn, do you have anything to submit to the court?" I nodded, rising slowly. I placed the red folder on the desk before me. "I do, Your Honor. This contains trust documentation, ownership transfer records, and financial evidence pertaining to both the property and the company in question." The judge motioned for the bailiff to collect it. Landon added, "We'd also like to request the court review supplementary testimony scheduled for delivery today." The judge raised an eyebrow. "Scheduled by whom?" Before Landon could answer, the doors at the back of the courtroom opened. 12 men and women entered in uniform. Their shoes echoed on the hardwood as they marched in, forming a straight line behind me. No one in the room spoke. You could feel the air shift. One of them, older, salt and pepper, hair, heavy shoulders, stepped forward. He handed a sealed envelope to the bailiff, who delivered it to the judge. The judge opened it and read. His brow furrowed. Then he looked up. "This is a letter from Douglas Evelyn dated 2 years ago. It reads, 'If Grace Evelyn ever finds herself in a court of law defending her rights against family members who've betrayed her. This is my final testimony. These 12 Marines served with us. They witnessed the creation of the trust. They were present when I signed over the company. Their word is my final act of honor.'" Gasps filled the courtroom. Amanda turned a shade paler. Richard shifted in his seat. The judge reviewed the documents again. All signatures match. All notarized. All verified by third-party legal services. I exhaled slowly. "I've heard enough," the judge said. "This court finds that the home in question was legally transferred into a trust with Grace Evelyn as the sole beneficiary. Additionally, ED Contracting, currently under management by Thomas Chandler, remains legally bound to its controlling interest, also Grace Evelyn." Richard's mouth fell open, but the judge raised a hand. "Furthermore, financial records show multiple unauthorized transfers made from company funds into Richard Evelyn's personal account. You are hereby ordered to repay $120,000 within 5 years. Failure to do so will result in legal seizure of assets." Amanda stood abruptly. This is insane, but her words were cut short as 2 men in black jackets entered the courtroom. "Federal Bureau of Investigation," one announced. "Amanda Evelyn, you are under arrest for wire fraud, federal tax evasion, and falsifying financial disclosures on loan applications." My eyes widened. "This wasn't part of our submission." I looked at Landon. He shook his head. "That part wasn't us." Amanda's shriek echoed as she was cuffed. Richard stumbled back, face drained of color. And me, I stood tall. Because Douglas wasn't just protecting a legacy. He'd prepared a battlefield. And I had just claimed victory. After the gavel fell and the courtroom slowly began to empty, I stayed seated. I didn't know why. Maybe it was the weight of the silence, or maybe it was because I didn't want to move until I could breathe again. Richard didn't leave either. He sat across the aisle, slumped forward with his elbows on his knees, staring at the polished floor like it might offer an answer. Amanda had been led out in handcuffs, her heels clicking against the floor as if defiance still lived in her spine. But now it was just me and him. Mother and son. 2 soldiers of different wars. He didn't look up right away, but when he did, his eyes weren't angry. They were just tired. "I didn't know she did all that," he said quietly. "The offshore accounts. The fraud. I didn't know." I studied his face, that same jawline I used to hold when he was sick with fever. Those same eyes that once asked if monsters were real. You didn't need to, I answered. You already did your part. His brow furrowed, confused. You signed the documents. You pushed me out of my home. You told a courtroom I was nothing but a broken woman. That I didn't matter. His lips parted like he wanted to explain, to defend, but no words came. I raised you to stand tall, I said, but you stood on my shoulders just to kick me off. The silence between us wasn't empty. It was heavy, dense with everything we hadn't said in years. I thought we were drowning, he whispered. I thought if I could just, you thought wrong, I cut in. And you never asked. He looked away. Shame is a quiet thing. It doesn't scream. It doesn't beg. It just sits there and hopes not to be seen. I didn't come here for revenge, I said. I came for truth. And truth came with a cost. For all of us. He nodded slowly. Then for a moment he looked like a boy again. A boy who had lost his compass, his pride, and the last excuse he thought could protect him. I didn't hate him, but I didn't recognize him either. And that, I think, was worse. Eventually the murmurs died. The reporters left. Even the judge retreated behind her chambers, her robe sweeping the floor like a curtain closing on a long, brutal play. I stood up. My knees ached, but my spine was straighter than it had been in years. The folder was still in my hands. 12 Marines waited near the exit, silent, composed, dignified in their presence. As I walked toward them, they stepped aside, forming a quiet line of respect. One of them, a younger man with gray at his temples, held the courtroom door open. I paused, turned back once. Richard was still seated, his silhouette framed by the glow of a late afternoon sun cutting through the high windows. For a second, I thought he might stand up, say something, ask to start again. He didn't. A few of the Marines looked in his direction as they exited, but none spoke to him. None offered a salute, not out of cruelty, but out of discipline. They knew when honor was broken, it stayed broken. Outside, the wind was crisp. The flag above the courthouse fluttered in a rhythm only soldiers seemed to understand. I inhaled deeply, the air sharp with clarity. One of the Marines, Tom, always silent but solid, walked beside me. "You okay, ma'am?" he asked. I gave a small nod. "I think I am." We walked in step for a while, not speaking, just moving forward as Marines do. In the parking lot, I stopped at my car and turned to look back at the building behind me. Sandra had once asked if I believed in forgiveness. I'd said yes, I still do. But forgiveness isn't always an open door. Sometimes it's just a decision not to carry someone else's burden anymore, not to let their choices rot the good in your memory. Not to hate, but not to forget either. Richard was my son. He still is. But the version of me he tried to erase, that woman, walked out of court today holding her own name, her own legacy, and her own peace. And for now, that's enough. The office smelled like fresh coffee and old wood, just like it used to when Douglas ran things. Only now it was Tom's turn. We sat across from each other in the same conference room where decisions had once shaped our family's future. He looked nervous. That made two of us. I placed the signed documents on the table and slid them toward him. "It's yours now," I said. Tom looked at me, his eyes steady but unreadable. "You sure about this?" I nodded. "Douglas trusted you. I trust you. And I've had enough boardrooms for a lifetime." The transfer of operational control was straightforward. Legal clean binding. I retained financial oversight, just a signature line on quarterly reports, but the rest belonged to Tom. "I'm not doing this for me," I told him. "But the company is worth more when it serves something beyond itself." He smiled, small and grateful. "So what now?" I opened my notebook and showed him a line I'd underlined twice. Veterans Relief Fund, monthly grant allocation, 20% of net profit. "We're going to make it official," I said. 20% of all net profits go directly to veteran support, housing, mental health, job placement. I want this place to be more than what Richard tried to tear down. Tom looked down at the note and nodded. Douglas would have liked that. He would have built it himself if he'd had more time. There was no speech, no ceremony. I stood, we shook hands, firm and full of mutual understanding, and I walked out with a folder in my arms and peace in my chest. On my way out, a young employee held the door for me. He looked barely 25, clipboard in one hand, pen in the other. "Ma'am," he said with respect. I gave him a smile. "Take care of this place. Then I stepped into the sunlight, not as a woman leaving something behind, but as someone finally stepping into something of her own. The house by the lake isn't big. It has 2 bedrooms, creaky wooden floors, and windows that fog up on cold mornings. I bought it with my own name on the deed. No legal tricks, no hidden clauses, just clean ownership and quiet living. I wake up early now, not because I have to, but because the sun hits the lake just right at 6:30. I make tea, feed my 2 dogs, Bear and Scout, and take my time walking the garden. Tomatoes in the back, peonies in the front. Douglas used to say peonies were stubborn flowers. I think he meant that as a compliment. In the evenings, I read or sit on the porch with a cup of chamomile. The silence doesn't scare me anymore. It feels earned. Last Tuesday, I received a letter. The handwriting on the envelope stopped me mid-step. It was Richard's. I stood by the mailbox for a long time before opening it. Inside was a single page. No excuses, no begging. Just, "I'm sorry, Mom. I understand now. I hope one day you can forgive me." There was no return address. I folded it once and placed it in the drawer beside my bed. I haven't replied. Maybe one day I will. But forgiveness isn't a reflex. It's a path. One you walk slowly, step by step, with no guarantee of where it leads, and maybe that's okay. What matters is that I keep walking. With dignity, with peace, with roots in the ground and the lake in my view. Somewhere between betrayal and justice, I found something unexpected. Myself, and she's worth keeping. It was a small room tucked inside the community center near Town Square. The folding chairs creaked when people shifted. A pot of lukewarm coffee sat in the back beside a plate of half-eaten cookies. I'd been invited to speak not as a veteran, not even as a businesswoman, just as someone who'd made it through. The group was called Rebuild, a space for women recovering from emotional trauma, some from betrayal, others from loss. A few were like me, survivors of both. I told them a little of my story, not the court details or the company names, just the feelings. The numbness after betrayal, the rage you swallow, the ache of waking up alone not because someone died, but because someone chose to walk away. After I finished, there was silence. Then a young woman raised her hand. She looked barely 30. Her eyes were sharp with anger but swollen from crying. "How did you not end up hating them?" she asked. "How do you let go of that kind of pain?" I paused. The kind of pause where the air seems to wait with you. Then I said I didn't let it go all at once. I carried it for years like a stone in my chest. I took a breath. I used to think forgiveness was weakness, that letting someone off the hook meant they won. But it doesn't. Forgiveness isn't about them walking free. It's about you walking away. Free. She frowned, confused. I leaned in. When I showed up in court, I didn't raise my voice. I didn't plead. I didn't fight dirty. I just held the truth, quietly, firmly. And when the Marines walked in, when that courtroom turned to look at me, it wasn't power I felt. It was peace. A few women nodded. One wiped her eyes. "I'm not saying don't feel anger," I added. "Feel it. Let it roar inside you if it must. But don't let it become your language. Your dignity is your sharpest weapon. Your stillness is your strongest rebuttal." The young woman whispered, "So forgiveness is strength." I smiled gently. Forgiveness is the choice to protect your heart from becoming like theirs, to honor your story by not rewriting it with bitterness. There was nothing more to say. The room exhaled together. Tonight the lake is quiet. The wind barely stirs the trees. My dogs are asleep at my feet, and on my lap is my journal, brown leather, soft at the edges, the kind that smells like old libraries and safety. I've written in it every week since the trial ended. Some entries were messy, tear-stained, ink-blurred. Others were lists of things I needed to do just to stay grounded. But tonight's entry feels different. Final, maybe. I was betrayed, I wrote, by people I gave my life to. Not strangers. Blood. And yet, I paused. I still believe in kindness. I still believe that some things can't be stolen. That dignity is immune to greed. That a life built in truth may bend, but it doesn't break. I look up and across the lake, the last sliver of sun sinks beneath the horizon, gold giving way to blue. Douglas would have said something poetic right now. I can almost hear his voice. I hold my pen again and add, To anyone out there feeling like the ground's disappeared beneath you, please know you are not alone, not now, not ever. I underline that line, not for emphasis, but as a promise, because I know someone somewhere will read this one day and find their breath again. Not because of me, but because someone somewhere once reminded me that survival isn't about shouting louder. It's about standing still when the storm tries to move you. I close the journal and hold it to my chest. Then I whisper into the silence, not asking for an answer, just releasing the last piece I made it. And maybe that's enough. Before we say goodbye, we'd love to know, where are you watching from? Is it a quiet morning with a warm cup of coffee, or a late night where stories like this keep you company? Let us know in the comments. We read everyone with gratitude. And if this story touched your heart, please consider subscribing to the channel. Not just to hear more stories like this, but to be part of a community that still believes in kindness, healing, and second chances. Thank you for spending your time with us today. Wherever you are, we hope you carry this story with you, and remember, sometimes the miracle doesn't knock on your door. It waits quietly until you're ready to open your heart. Take care, and we'll see you in the next story.